Hey, all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren, I'm your host, and today I've got a great guest, Mr. Chris Young. He is the CEO of Combustion Inc., former CEO of Chef Steps, and the co-author of Modernist Cuisine. I'll be right back with Chris Young.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey, all, I want to introduce you to a company I just started working with, Fresh Jack's Organic Spices out of Jacksonville, Florida. They're a small, family-run company that's fast-growing. I've tried a bunch of their different seasoning blends and spices, and I can tell you they're all fresh, all organic. None of them contain artificial flavors or sweeteners. None of them have anti-caking agents or preservatives. They all taste like they were just made for you yesterday. Check them out, guys. They're on Amazon in the link below. They have different sample packs, different blends. Like I said, they also have the individual seasonings and spices as well. Fresh Jack's Organic Spices. Check them out, guys. I love them. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I am your host. And today I've got a really special guest. I've been wanting to get him on for a long time. I have Chef Chris Young. He is the CEO of Combustion Inc., former CEO of Chef Steps. Chris, welcome. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Darren, it's great to be here. You've already introduced me. I'm Chris. And I guess the very quick summary of my background is I am somebody who studied science, bailed on a PhD, became a cook, became the founding head chef of the Fat Duck Experimental Kitchen. Ran that for 5 years before co-authoring Modernist Cuisine with Nathan Myhrvold. And after Modernist Cuisine was launched into the world, I founded Chef Steps with Grant Crilly and Ryan Matthew Smith and Ed Starbird. Ran Chef Steps, created Jewel, and this was supposed to be my year of taking a break, but instead I decided to start another company called Combustion Inc. So I am, I suppose, both a chef and a culinary inventor.
Well, that's it, guys. Thanks for joining the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. Chris just summed it up. Well, I mean, that's a pretty good summation of who you are and what you've done. But now I want to go into some details because I think you've been more behind the scenes in a lot of stuff than you're not somebody who's out there. And a lot of that, I recognize that with Chef Steps. You know, Grant was always the one in the videos and stuff. And so everybody kind of, thinks of Chef Steps, you think of Grant. But you kind of were the one behind it. And I want to get back into how you got started. You kind of said, and I read up on your bio and stuff, that, you didn't go to school. You didn't go to culinary school. You went to school for mathematics and biochemistry. And, like some of the other people I've talked to, like Kenji, that, started out on a totally different career path. Was it you went to work in a restaurant and fell in love with cooking, or how did it work? Because I know that's what happened with him. He went to work in a restaurant like as a part-time job and just fell in love with it.
I wish it was. I wish it was quite that romantic. No, in fact, it was weirdly much more traumatic. I had a super bad breakup with a girlfriend, and I think was incredibly depressed, burned out on school. Kind of decided I needed to radically change a bunch of things. And so I kind of decided after almost 9 years of higher education that I just needed to do something different. The first .com era had kind of completely imploded. And so a lot of my technical skills were not highly employable in the Seattle area. So I'd always liked cooking. I figured I'd get a job in a restaurant, make a little money. Worst case, I'd become a slightly better cook. And it was far more accidental. I ended up talking my way into a restaurant called Mistral, which was opened by a chef named William Balekis, who had come out of David Boulet's kitchen. And, I kind of fell in love with it. It was the thing I needed in my life at that time. And, I just, it's just worked for me. I've had a lot of luck of ending up at the right places with the right people at the right time. And the culinary industry has been just an absolute delight for the last 20 years.
So how did you start out, working in a kitchen in Seattle and finding your way into or actually being the guy who helped develop the Fat Duck experimental kitchen in London. It seems like that's a kind of a weird path or
well,
hard path.
It's a bit of a leap, right? So the actual story there is I've been cooking professionally for about a year, and my future mother-in-law, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife's mother, gave me an anthology of food writing, and it had an article in it called "The Gastronauts" by Harold McGee, and I was a huge Harold fan. In fact, his book I'd been reading while I was in grad school, and it played a pretty big influence on I should get into cooking. And Harold's article back in 2002 wrote about this crazy chef in London that nobody had heard of with a funny name, Heston Blumenthal, that was trying to apply science in his kitchen to do interesting things. And it sounded amazing. So in February of 2003, I flew myself over to London. I sort of obliterated my credit cards. I had sent a fax. This is how old this was. I'd sent a fax to the Fat Ducks that I would love to dine in the restaurant and can I stage for a weekend? And they said, sure. So I flew myself over on Valentine's weekend alone to London in 2003. I had a dinner by myself on Friday night and it blew my mind. It was so off the map of what food could be. It was so different. Nobody was doing anything like this in Seattle. Nobody was doing anything like this anywhere. And I came back to work for the next day. I staged for the weekend. And at the end of the weekend, I simply said, like, I will do anything to work here. Can I get a longer stage? And, I'm willing to work for free, essentially. And they said, sure. Because what people don't appreciate is, one, I thought it was a 1 Michelin star restaurant when I got there. They'd just gotten their second, but they had no customers. It was teetering on the brink of insolvency. So the idea of, a chef who's willing to come over and be free labor. Sure. It's not like they had a line out the door back then and everyone kind of thought they were weird. They'd certainly built up a reputation. Everybody who, Gordon Ramsay, Marco Pierre-White, all these chefs in London would come out on the weekends and have Sunday lunch there. Heston had built up quite a reputation, but it wasn't financially viable. And they said, sure. So I went back to my hotel in London that night. I called my girlfriend and said, guess what? I've just accepted a job in London. I got to come home, pack my bags and be back here in a week. I actually did end up marrying that girl, but at the time she said, I can't talk about this. Click, hung up. I came back. I staged for the next 3 months in the spring of 2003, pretty much getting my ass handed to me every day. I was so out. The restaurant in the kitchen was at a very elite level even then. I'd been cooking professionally for about a year, so you remember the Harlem Globetrotters. There's always there's always the team that loses to them, right? I'm on
Right.
that team, but somehow I've snuck into a Harlem Globetrotter uniform, but I started to figure it out. I showed up earlier, I stayed later just to get ahead of my work, and I think generally people respected me for working harder to try to figure it out. But I also had this science thing. And so Heston would be like, oh, can you figure this out? And I was always kind of the person that could understand what Heston was asking. And on like the lunch break, I would go into one of our sheds in the back garden and sort of figure it out. And so at the end of 3 months, I sat down with Heston and I'd asked to have some time with him before service one day. And we sat down and I said, a lot of it was just trying to give advice. Where should I go from here? And Heston goes, I've always wanted to have a kitchen just dedicated to working on the menu development, just working on new techniques and ideas. And with your science background, would you be willing to move to London and get that started? And, this is kind of the dream offer, right? Like I was smart enough to say, absolutely. And so, for the next 6 months, we had to apply for a work permit for me. I had to live back in Seattle, and I do all the experiments in my apartment kitchen in Seattle and call Heston every Sunday with an update. And I'd fly over at least once a month and do service and show everyone what I've been working on, which was a completely crazy thing for Heston to fund and back at the time because the restaurant absolutely could not afford it. And in the meantime, they had to advertise for somebody with a Michelin star cooking experience who also had advanced degrees in hard sciences, so that the UK government would give me a work permit. And we got that. So I moved to England full time as to found what became the Fat Duck Experimental Kitchen in June of 2004. And between 2004 and 2008, the Fat Duck took off. I mean, we nearly didn't. We were literally about one day away from bankruptcy the day we got our third star, and that saved the restaurant. And a few months later, we were voted best restaurant in the world. And at that point, it was kind of hang on to the rocket ship. And it was incredible working with this amazingly talented culinary team with brilliant chefs, Heston, but Ashley Palmer Watts, Jockey Petrie in pastry, later Kyle Connaughton, who's now at Single Thread, who took over from me when I left the Fat Duck. This was, and of course you had chefs like Wiley Dufresne and Albert Adria and Fern Adria. The culinary world was super innovative in those years, and I got to be sort of in the middle of it at the Fat Duck. It was kind of an irreplaceable experience that opened a lot of doors for me. So, well, I'm pretty sure I couldn't go back and relive that and redo that kind of. It was not an easy job. I don't think I could survive it again. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was absolutely the best thing I could have imagined doing with most of my 20s.
Well, one of the things I take out of that, from what you're telling me and from just looking at your history, if you didn't have that biochemistry background and your mathematical background, your sciences based background, you probably wouldn't have gone through any or, flown over there and met Heston and done any of that.
No, it's all, there's of course a ton of luck. And at the time, it was super ambiguous. And am I making the right decisions? And everyone who knew me from academia thought I was crazy. My parents, thankfully, were very supportive, and they were like, go for it. But most of my friends thought I was bonkers, and I kind of dropped off the social map for the next better part of a decade because working in a professional kitchen doesn't give you a lot of free Friday and Saturday nights to hang out with your normal friends. But it was a lot of luck, and the interesting thing is, if I didn't have the background, it wouldn't have happened. Because I was a nothing special line cook. Like I worked hard. I wasn't I was competent, but there were many people who are better at knife skills, are faster, are more talented at the execution. My sort of superpower of cooking was the ability to understand the science of cooking and figure out how to apply it in a practical way in the kitchen to do things that other people haven't done. And that's kind of, I was lucky to fall into a career and sort of invent one on the fly, I suppose, that lets me do exactly that.
Yeah, if you didn't have that background, you probably would have been, the salad guy for a longer period of time.
Yes.
I worked in restaurants when I was younger, so I kind of know that, you start out in the prepping of the food, and it takes you a while to get over on the line, and finishing the plates is, kind of the, there's a big hierarchy that you have to go through.
There is a hierarchy there, and I'll be honest, even on my best days, I'm not necessarily the guy you want right next to you on the line.
That's fine. Great. So you moved into the restaurant business. You took this big leap of faith, and you moved to London and worked for Heston Blumenthal, who now is one of the most famous chefs out there, and does a lot of the modernist type, cooking. Mm-hmm. How did you get back to Seattle, and how did this come about with Nathan Mervold and getting into the modernist cuisine?
Yeah, so it was, again, a bit of luck. Now, Nathan had been a guest of the Fat Duck, and, after his dinner there, he wanted to come and tour the Fat Duck Experimental Kitchen. So I was there. And, Nathan at the time, I think, was pushing some theory of how jacquarding worked on e-gullet. And he came into the lab and introduced himself. I'm Nathan Mervold, I said hello. And I said, I know who you are. And you're completely fucking wrong about that stuff you're saying on e-gullet. And Nathan thought that was hysterical. Like that, I just was like, no, you're just wrong about this. It doesn't work that way at all. It's this, this, and this. And, we weirdly kind of struck up a bit of an initial friendship over that. We both had a Seattle connection. I lived in Seattle before the Fat Duck. I went to university here. And so we stayed in contact via email. We had a shared interest in barbecue, something that was always sort of my backup plan. If the whole professional chefing thing doesn't work out, I'm going to go on the barbecue circuit. So we would exchange emails and just kind of generally kept in touch. And when I would be back in Seattle, I went over to his house and checked out his completely awesome kitchen and dinosaurs. And so it was just this friendly thing by somebody who shares a like-minded interest. And my son was born in London. Now my wife is American and I'm American. And it was just time for a change. 5 years in a restaurant like the Fat Duck is a couple of tours of duty. And anybody who's worked in a restaurant like that knows exactly what I mean. So I resigned my position at the Fat Duck. I was going to move back to the States to be closer to family. I'd been talking to chefs like David Kinch and Wiley Dufresne about maybe coming and doing something with them, but I didn't really have a plan. And, as usually happens when you move jobs, you've got to send a bunch of emails out that like, hey, my email address is going to change. I won't have my Fat Duck email address anymore. So I sent Nathan just a courtesy email saying, hey, I'm moving on from the Fat Duck. If you want to stay in touch, here's my email going forward. And about 3 minutes later, I got a response from him. And the subject line just said, crazy idea. And he said, hey, I don't know what you're planning on doing, but, why don't you come work with me? We could write a book together. And turned out Nathan was down in the Mediterranean on his boat. So he invited me down to spend the weekend with him on his boat, and we'd go to El Buoy together. And he'd already started thinking about modernist cuisine. He'd already done some outline, and it was at the, hey, this might be a real thing kind of stage. Like we should do this. And it was going to be a book mostly about sous vide, but he had the beginnings of an outline. And over that weekend, we flushed out, I still have the handwritten pages, what became the outline for modernist cuisine. And, this was kind of a hardship interview, right? Like I'm on this mega yacht. We're going to El Buoy together. We're drafting the book. It's like, let me twist my arm for you. And so that was kind of like, well, why wouldn't we do this? This could kind of be our contribution back to the culinary world where, right now, if you want to know how chefs are doing some of these techniques, you kind of have to go work at these restaurants and try to piece together what you can as a stagiaire. We could do a lot of good for the culinary world by putting this all into a book together. And, I still have another email from Nathan once I started in November of 2008, November of 2007. Have an email saying, Chris, this probably isn't even going to be a full-time gig. This is going to be a few hundred pages, mostly about sous vide. We ought to be able to get it done in a few weekends. You'll have lots of other time to work on other projects. I don't know, and obviously that turned out to be completely not true. 5 years later at the high water mark, we had 39 people working on this book. And I like to say it's what happens when you have no adult supervision to tell you you've run out of time or money. Even as late as about 9 months before the book shipped, we still thought it was only like 3 volumes. And then I turned in the meat chapter that became, more than 2/3 of volume 3. And, we just kind of kept adding things because there was just so much cool stuff where we could kind of give people an explanation of the hows and whys of cooking in this really visually compelling way that nobody had done. And so, the first 4 years of that project were awesome. The last year of that project was as hard as just about anything I've ever tried to do because it's time to ship and everybody's angry at everybody and we're behind and the budget's spiraling in, whatever budget there was, it's spiraling out of control. It's officially getting expensive, even for Nathan. And so it's like every other day, it's we got to ship. But we got it done. And, you never know. I remember we talked to a bunch of publishers. We ultimately self-published, but we talked to a bunch of publishers and at first nobody had interest. And then when we showed them the galley proofs that we produced, they're like, oh, that's what you were talking about? We totally want to publish that. And we're like, well, how many copies do you think people would buy? And they're like, oh, well, we think we might be able to sell 3,000 copies around the world. And, Nathan's thinking about how much he's spent on this going, well, we need a little more optimism. But we honestly, we didn't know what the reception was going to be. You don't ever know. It could have completely fallen flat. It could have been, there was certainly feedback from some chefs I know of who are you guys to write a book like this? There should be a chef writing a book like this. You guys shouldn't be writing a book like this. And these were some pretty well-known famous chefs who I won't name because they'd probably be embarrassed by it now. But, you had some people who were really upset. And we were pleasantly surprised that, think in year one, almost 50,000 copies.
Nice.
So it was incredibly successful. It just showed that there was a real appetite for this kind of knowledge out there. And so it was a blast to be part of.
But it started out as a rabbit hole, I guess. You thought it was going to be, one book with, maybe a couple hundred pages, and it turned into how many books and how many pages?
What is it? It's like 2,500 pages, 5 volumes, plus a kitchen manual, and there's stuff that got cut, believe it or not. Like there's stuff that didn't make it.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
I'm sure once you got started and you, like you said, once you start going down that rabbit hole and then you go, well, what about this? Oh, what about this? We need to add this.
Well, so this is a really interesting thing. Like every project I've been involved in, whether it was the Fat Duck or whether it was Modernist Cuisine or whether it was Chef Steps and whether it's Combustion, now, so many people assume like, oh, you should sit down and you should write a plan and you got to figure this all out and then execute. That's like this very corporate way of thinking, and nothing super interesting gets done that way.
Right.
You can write the plan, you can fantasize and lie to yourself of how it's going to work, and maybe there are some projects that can work that way. But all of the really interesting ones, all of the ones that really do something different, there is no way a priority to write the plan. You're betting on a team, you're betting on yourself, and you have to be willing to go down these blind alleys, to fail, to have all this uncertainty, and then just have the perseverance to eventually pull it back and ship it. And it is scary as all get out, because it right up to the end can feel like you're going to completely fall on your face. That was true with Chef Steps. That was true with Jewel. The Fat Duck, when we were in Spain on the Thursday, we found out we got our 3rd Michelin star. We had 0 customers on the book. We couldn't make payroll on Friday. And then the news leaked out. And Heston was on the headlines the next day. And we started booking up. We actually, the immediate next day, we went from 0 customers to fully booked. And we have never not been fully booked since, as far as I know. That's about it. Modernists felt that way at times. I know we nearly imploded with Jewel a couple times over stuff that just nearly killed us. And it takes a certain type of person who wants to be part of it. But, that rabbit hole is, I think, how all good projects start.
Yeah, that's where your creativity and your experimentation and all that, that's where the great things come from. They don't come from a corporate manual, that's for sure. A step A, step B, step C, it doesn't work that way. And you had that. To artists, so it's the same way with an artist. They don't just say how to paint a picture. They can't write a book on how to paint a picture, right?
Well, look, at the Fat Duck, you had reviewers who didn't know how to think about the Fat Duck or review it. You had some reviewers who got it, like Matthew Ford at The Guardian, just understood. But you had others who were just like, I don't get it. Like, why? And they were totally confused. And that was really hard for the restaurant. At Modernist Cuisine, like early on, when we tried to explain this book to find a publisher to partner with, because like publishing a book and distribution, that's a bunch of stuff to do, very different from creating the book. So we thought maybe we need a publisher to help with us. And these folks are in the business, but as soon as you come to them with a proposal that isn't this successful idea combined with this successful idea equals more success for you, if you come with something that's truly off their map, they just can't wrap their head around it, even the really visionary ones. And Chef Steps was kind of the same way. You had almost the entire time people going, I don't get it. I don't get it. You had people going, I don't get Jewel. And, largely speaking, those projects all were successful. And the problem is all of the incumbents, the traditional corporations that talk to Chef Steps, the traditional publishers that talk to Modernist, or the traditional reviewers that were trying to review the Fat Duck, they all failed to understand how the world was changing. And yet they sort of became when they tell you you're crazy, it's hard not to take that feedback on and internalize it and be like, maybe I am about to dig a giant hole in the ground.
Yeah. Well, that's like you're saying, they all were looking at the past and what worked before or what they're used to. They weren't looking into the future and what can be great. They were, we did a Martha Stewart book or whatever, whatever you want to say, and that was successful. Well, can you do something like, what Emerald did, or can you do something because, we know that works. They weren't looking at, well, maybe we should try this because it's something totally new and something totally different that people might go, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, look, those kinds of projects can be successful. I know plenty of people who can work within those constraints. I am not one of them. I am not interested in doing the next iteration, but so I actually almost struggle to deal with people who want to fit you into their sort of backwards looking model.
Right. Yeah, I'm the same way. I try to do my own thing as well. So let's talk a little bit about sous vide, because I deal with my brand and stuff. I mix barbecue and sous vide, and when I first was exposed to sous vide, it was only about 3 or 4 years ago, and what I opened up, and you kind of hit on that you love barbecue. I looked at it like it's the ultimate low and slow, compared to barbecue. That's what kind of,
right.
I said, I love barbecue and I've been doing barbecue for a while, but this is like blows barbecue away because it's lower and slower, and it does some things I can do that I can't do on the smoker or a grill. But if I combine the two, I can make something totally different that I can't make with either one of them. So how did you get involved in sous vide? Was it at Heston's, or was it with the restaurant you worked at in Seattle before you went to the Fat Duck, or was it Modernist?
It was the Fat Duck is the first place that I was exposed to sous vide. And I'd certainly used laboratory baths in the chemistry department. Like, they were not an unfamiliar technology to me. And actually, in the very earliest days of Fat Duck, a big part of my job was getting all this laboratory equipment that Heston was buying on eBay to work. Like, he'd see something, he's like, I don't know what it does, but it looks cool, so we're going to buy it. So rotary evaporators, laboratory baths. And, part of the challenge was it required a lot of experimentation, because back in 2002, 2003, there was only a handful of restaurants that were really using sous vide. And nobody really, the way I think about it is, suddenly you'd given really creative chefs the most accurate thermostat that they'd ever had in the kitchen. Like, it was 100 times more accurate than anything they'd ever had. And so the idea of, you could cook something for 72 hours with it being perfect at a constant temperature, like, that hadn't really been possible before. And so there was a lot of experimentation of like, how do I create the perfect pork belly? Is it 48 hours at 60 Celsius? What about 62 Celsius? How does time and temperature relate? And, I remember 2004 or 5, you had different chefs all doing the sous vide egg, right? Wiley liked the 64-degree egg, and other people like the 63-degree egg. And you realize we're arguing over like a degree difference. And it's actually kind of absurd, right? And if you think about it, like, we have these words of how do you want your steak done? I want rare, medium. And those are inherently imprecise words. And they actually vary a lot geographically. What somebody in Cleveland thinks of as medium rare is much more rare than what somebody in San Francisco thinks of as medium rare. But there was no point of being more precise for most of our culinary history, because chefs didn't have a way of delivering it. If you went into a steakhouse that isn't doing sous vide and said, I would like my steak cooked to 129.5 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to look like an ass. But they also probably can't do it. That's beyond, not consistently. And so sous vide unlocked that potential in 2002. And I did a lot of the experimenting of trials upon trials upon trials to find the combinations we preferred most for different things. And of course, one of the areas that sous vide really shines is low and slow, which, being somebody who's always loved barbecue, there's nothing as low and slow as sous vide. And so it's sort of this, you can't not look at that and say, well, if an 18-hour is pretty good for a brisket, what would 72 hours be like? And, it isn't far where you start to realize sous vide really lets you divide and conquer, where I can combine the low temperature, long time component that turns a sow's ear into a silk purse. I can let sous vide do that. But then I can combine it with traditional hot smoking to get the best of both worlds. And once you start doing that, you experiment like, well, should I smoke first and then sous vide, or should I sous vide and then smoke, or should I do both? And there's differences, right? And that's where the art starts to come back in of, what do you prefer? How do you talk about those differences? And so I think for most of the early 2000s, that was a lot of the stuff I was doing. And Nathan was doing experiments and talking about them on eGullet, and other people were. And that was kind of the genesis for what became modernist cuisine. Was this stuff scattered everywhere. It's so much knowledge that's in people's heads. What if we put it all into one book and make it more accessible? Can we help advance sous vide? And I think we did. And then, of course, you had Sancerre, you had Polyscience, and then you had Sancerre, and then you had Innova, and then you had us, all kind of make sous vide more accessible. Because back in 2002, I was paying £1,000 for a used laboratory bag.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think that's when it really started to explode into the home cooks. When you had you guys, Jewel, Innova, Sancerre, started making these where they're affordable. Now you can get them for $50, and they're not the best quality, but I mean, you can get a decent.
Those ones are crap.
Yeah, you can get a decent one for $150, $200. Jewel's now at $200, so I mean, they kind of itch the price up over the years, but to get a really good one, you're under $200, you can get a really good sous vide circulator, and Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and all the help with the apps and stuff that you can have. Back then, you didn't have any of that, but I'm with you on that, because I started out just with a Facebook group talking about mixing barbecue and sous vide, and you get into the point of yes, I can combine the two, and then you get into personal preference. Well, do I want to smoke it first or after? It can be done either way, but it's going to come down to personal preference, what you really like. Do you want a better bark? It's better if you do the smoke after. Do you want to, more smoke penetrating deeper into the meat? Maybe smoke it before, and then sear it after. I mean, there's little things that you can tweak and do, and it's going to come down to personal preference. And that's the fun part to me is doing that, experimenting with trying the different things, and you get the basic down of I can combine these two and I can do it either way, but now let's tweak it here and there and make it to where the way I like it.
Absolutely. And that's really the craft of barbecue, and you don't ever want to take that away from people. Like there's no value of saying, no, we've commoditized it, just throw everything in the bag and it'll be perfect. It's like the point for me is if I make some barbecue that I think is great, I'd like to know how I did it. Like, what did I really do so that I can do it again? And for me, that's always been the value of being able to measure things by having technologies that make certain things easier. But, I wouldn't want it de-skilled where it's boil in a bag, right? Like, that's not interesting to me. But if I have a sous vide device that can get me the tenderness, and then, one of my favorite barbecues is my Combustion. If I can use my Combustion, because I've modded mine out, I put a PID controller on it. I've kind of gone nuts. Mine is a very hacked Combustion. No slight to Bill Carew. It's a great product, but I find that I can get the barbecue that I think is as good as I know how to make it by combining those technologies. And even with my Combustion, you're not really measuring the real smoker temperature, which is why I started the surface temperature cooking and made thermometers so that I can know, well, what's actually happening at the surface of my food. Because if I'm doing a full load of barbecue, the humidity is much higher, things cook different. If I'm just doing a few racks of ribs, the surface temperature will be different under all of those cases. And I like measuring it so that I can be confident that I'm going to deliver. If I'm going to put the time in, if I'm going to, burn through a mountain of wood and baby it all day, I want it to be awesome. And I find that measuring that in some very simple ways gives me control over my creativity and my craft.
You, like several other people I've talked to, and I guess people like us, we want to know what's going on when we cook. We don't just, I don't want to just somebody tell me, okay, well, here's what you got to do, put mustard on it, and put your rub on and then wrap it when it hits 160. You want to know why things are happening and how you can, adjust it and make it different and make it your own. There's a lot of, and I'm sure it's not just barbecue. I mean, it's in all across the whole, cooking in general, the traditionalist or the people who just do it just because my grandma made it this way. And then there's people like us that go, I want to know why. Meathead's the same way. Meathead Goldwyn from Amazing Ribs. But yeah, it's people like us and want to understand why. And then we want to teach people, this is why you need to know this, because don't just take a recipe and just follow it. Be able to create your own recipe and make it, the way you like it. Be able to look at a recipe and go, that looks good and it probably will turn out great, but I'd like to add a little bit more here, tweak it here and there. You can't do that if you don't understand how your whole cooking process works.
Yeah. I've always found a lot of my creativity in cooking comes from really understanding the hows and whys. It's an ability, because it allows me to, if I have a goal in mind, if there's something I'm trying to do, if I don't have some mental model of how is this working, what affects what, I'm just kind of shooting into the dark as I try to like get to my destination, and that doesn't work. So things like measuring, things like understanding the role humidity plays, or what's the real cooking temperature and how does it change as the food cooks, those are things that allow me to be more creative. They allow me to take bigger creative leaps because I'm quite confident that it's going to work out. And so I don't have to take these small incremental things of just tweak a spice, adjust this. It's like, no, I know this is what's going on. So I'm going to take this big step here, and it can be transformative.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, all, it's Darren, and I want to take a second to talk to you about the high-powered torches from Grill Blazer, the grill gun and sous vide gun. I was lucky enough to be a part of this project long before it was a Kickstarter, and I love them. If you're looking for something to sear your food within seconds, check out the sous vide gun. If you're looking for a torch to light your grill and have it up and cooking within 5 minutes, your lump or briquettes, check out the grill gun. It can also light outdoor fire pits and your fireplace within minutes. Check it out, guys, at the link below and get 10% off your order. Check out the grill gun and the sous vide gun by Grill Blazer. So we talked about Modernist cuisine and how that was like having a baby. It's, what, 7 years you said it took, or 5 years?
Well, Modernist cuisine was 5 years, and then Chef Steps was just about 8 years. Yeah.
So I want to move into Chef Steps. So when you're done with Modernist cuisine, you got that out there, it was successful. Then you said, okay, what's next? And then what made you think of Chef Steps, and how did you picture Chef Steps? Because I know you weren't off the bat going, I want to make a jewel like Scott Hummingbird.
No.
Did you work with Scott, by the way, at the Modernist? Was he there?
We briefly overlapped. So I do know Scott. Scott's a good friend. He's great. He's a great guy. I feel a little bad that, Sancerre didn't ultimately make it. But that's business. Yeah, Scott and I overlapped a bit, and there was no vision that Chef Steps would become that. I think the logic at the time, and this is going back to 2011, was we started Modernist cuisine in 2007. In 2007, as hard as it is to remember now, YouTube didn't exist. Blogging on WordPress was like the hot thing to do. Facebook was still on college campuses. Twitter, I don't even remember if Twitter existed in 2007. I certainly wasn't on it. So by 2012, when Modernist came out and we were doing the publicity, the world had radically changed. And I did note that. It was, hey, it used to be that a book was the best way to get your information out to a group of customers, to an audience, to a community. That's no longer true. A couple folks with a digital camera, like a Canon. We were using Canon 5D Mark II, but whatever, like that kind of technology plus YouTube in a garage. It's possible to build a worldwide audience, just like you're doing with your podcast. You can reach anyone. You don't need to get a radio show anymore. And so we kind of wanted to jump on that, and there was things we knew we could do with video that you just couldn't communicate on the pages of a book. So, Ryan Matthew Smith, who'd been the principal photographer for Modernist Cuisine, Grant Crilly, who'd been one of our lead development chefs, myself, and Ed Starbird, who was a college buddy of mine, who was sort of our MBA finance guy, because we were terrible at that stuff. We had some ideas that we should do something here. And it was wandering in the wilderness. Are we going to be a consultancy? We did some early advertising video work, some videos for Conair Wearing. We did some consulting with Johnson and Wales University, but ultimately we realized, like, hey, we should just be putting these videos online, and anybody who wants to learn this stuff, we're gonna create classes. I think if you go back to 2012, we thought like online classes would be based around videos would be our thing. And we launched that. And I think we got like almost 20,000 signups right away. And so we kind of realized that, hey, there's a real company here. We pretty quickly learned that online classes were probably not the future for us. And so there was a lot of wandering around of what kind of content should we be making for our community? What kind of things what kind of things are interesting? And around 2013, we got serious at looking at hardware because we're like, well, content's great, but at the end of the day, you actually have to go into the kitchen and cook. And the existing tools aren't as smart as they could be. We could do a better job. And in particular, a lot of our sous vide content was very, very popular. And as much as Sancerre was fine and Innova was fine, we realized that these devices were out there. They were relatively affordable, and yet people are still really confused how to use them. And so people would keep coming for our sous vide content. And we had a vision that what if we made a sous vide device that was really designed to be a kitchen tool, not a laboratory gadget? What if we took advantage of the fact that we all have smartphones now, so we can provide guidance and visual instruction within the app? Would that make it more accessible? Would that be helpful for our community? And that eventually evolved into Joule, and it went really well. And it was fascinating. When we launched Joule, 80% of our customers would just type the temperature into the app and start cooking. Within about a year and a half, 80% of our customers used our visual doneness feature, where they could just look at an image or a video of the texture and say, yeah, that's what I want. And that really correlated with, all of a sudden, we weren't selling to the early adopters who had it all figured out, that had all the temperatures memorized. We were reaching everyday people who just wanted to eat better food. And we were doing a great job of helping them. So while I know the decision to have no controls on the device was hugely controversial, I think Reddit wanted to drag me into the street and have me shot. The thought process behind it was, by moving the controls into the smartphone, by moving it into software, we could learn from our community. We could send updates every week and make the product better for people, easier to use. We were right about some of that. Ultimately, if I did it all over again, I'd probably put controls on the device and give people both options. But, we had to make some choices, and we tried to make the one that would serve our customer base best. And it wasn't entirely unsuccessful. We sold a lot of Joules. And I think we really did show that the power of giving people a way to express their human preferences just by looking at photos or images and saying, yeah, that's what I want, is a really powerful idea. People don't want to translate their desires into engineering parameters like, oh, I would like my steak cooked at 129.5 for 45 minutes. They go, I just want my steak like this. Give it to me. Because the real benefit of sous vide is not the technology. It's the food that ends up on the plate and the fact that it's going to be great. And so Chef Steps was a very, very weird company. In a lot of ways, it was very experimental about how was social media going to change how a company interacts with its customers? How do smartphones change the way you can design tools that work in the kitchen? We were the first to do an Alexa skill, because when your hands are covered in goo, voice is a fantastic way to control a device. So, I think there was just a lot of curiosity, but at the foundation, Chef Steps was always a company about serving a community of cooks that were passionate about cooking and helping them be better, whether it was by creating content or creating tools, and listening to them and learning and making changes accordingly. And I've yet to really come into to interact with another company that tried to think that much about how do they serve their community of customers.
I can vouch for that. I know, and I've worked with Innova, and I've had other sous vide circulators, and usually, they have apps and they try to kind of help you and teach you, but not as much as Chef Steps did. Chef Steps was more of, I'm going to take this semi-confusing, complicated cooking method and kind of bring it down so you can understand it, with the pictures of what your doneness level is and all that, and a lot of these steps that were in it, and a lot of the videos that you guys provided wasn't just sous vide, but a lot of it was sous vide, but it went into, look, I know you're a novice, so here's how you're going to do it.
A big part of that was, a significant fraction of the senior employees in Chef Steps came out of the hospitality industry. And we always thought of ourselves as a hospitality company where our job is to try to anticipate the needs of our customers and delight them. And, and our customers could be pretty diverse. We did a lot of sous vide content, but we also had like high-speed centrifuge content. We also had, pan roasting content. And, that was a challenge inside the company from an operational standpoint to be that diverse and all over the map. But it was all out of the intent of our customers are people who love to cook, and our job is to help them choose to cook and be more successful. And that infected everything we did. Our customer service, the woman who started and built up our customer service team came out of Canalys in Seattle. And we really said, we want you to take a customer centric approach where the default is they're right. And how do we serve them well? Sure, there was some fraud and some people abused it, but it was certainly, we just built it into the business model. With the content, it was, what is our community telling us they want from us? What are we not educating them enough on? And, I think that was an absolute blast to work that way. I think that's in a lot of ways what inspired me to get up and go to work every day.
So now it is corporate because now, Chef Steps is part of Breville, and
Yep.
and they're, Grant's moved on to, he's running the Chef Steps. I guess they still have the subscription service that they're doing
Yep.
in the videos and all that. And he seems to be happy doing that. I mean, he seems happy behind the camera. So
he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways, Breville solved some problems that we struggled. There was a tension, which is, look, Chef Steps made its money by selling Jewel. The content didn't really make money for us. Under Breville, Grant has a lot more freedom, not only to be able to sell the content directly as their Studio Pass product, but also Breville makes a lot more kitchen appliances than we do. So it's easier for them to be like, oh, today we're doing stuff with a toaster oven, and if you would like one, we have a very nice one.
Exactly.
Chef Steps didn't have that. So I think Grant's doing a fantastic job at Chef Steps. I think the content is as good as it's ever been, and people should check it out.
Definitely. So now you've moved on to, you said you took some time off in between, and we said, like most people like you, or go, what's next? What do I want to do next? And you're always thinking, you're always trying to solve problems, it seems like to me anyway. And then, so now you got your company called Combustion Inc. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so people can see. There we go. That it,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So now it's combustion.inc. So everybody can go to that and take a look at what you got coming out now.
Mhm.
So this thing is it's kind of familiar to me because I've been using a similar product called the Meat Stick, and you got the meter out there that are wireless thermometers that you can use on your smoker, oven, and what's that now. Yours is a lot different. It has some similar properties to some of the things that are out there. And I guess Yumly has one now as well, but yours is a little bit different. So why don't you go ahead and explain to me what this product is, because there's not a lot of information on your website right now, because I'm sure there's going to be some things added to it, but
yeah. So right now we're at the stage of saying, hey, we're building this thing, and legitly, there you go. We are in fact building it. It is not just a bunch of renderings. A thermometer is just one of these tools people should have. A kitchen timer is another one of those tools. And, I'm not actually arguing for more technology for technology's sake, but I am saying that there's a lot of things that are possible to do now to help people cook. A thermometer is great at telling you where you're at. It's not so great at telling you how long it will take to get where you want to go. A thermometer measures the temperature at the center of the food, which is the last place to see the temperature change. And the real cooking temperature is, well, what's happening at the surface? Because the surface might have a fat cap. It's evaporating. It depends on the humidity. It isn't just the wet bulb, and it isn't just the dry bulb. It's somewhere in between. And so for years, when I barbecue, when I roast something in the oven, I've slipped a fine temperature sensor under the surface of my food as well. And I actually control my Combustion based on the surface temperature, because it's way more consistent, because that's the real cooking temperature. If I'm roasting a chicken, I might start out at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And as the surface temperature comes up, I will back the temperature off. So this was supposed to be my year off. This was going to be my sabbatical year. I went, 5 years at the Fat Duck, straight into 5 years at Modernist Cuisine, straight into 8 years at Chef Steps. It's like, damn, that's a lot. I'm getting older, and I was going to travel. I was going to live abroad again, and then COVID happened, and I can't sit still. I have far too many grills and smokers in my yard, and I was tinkering, and we're doing some very cool things in barbecue that aren't quite ready yet, but hopefully next year. And I wanted a thermometer that simplified this. I have a rat's nest of wires coming out of my smoker. It's a pain in the butt. It's definitely not what you would call user friendly. I've got it wired up to my laptop, all these things, and the control it gives me is amazing. The ability to get a sous vide level of precision out of my oven, out of my smoker is remarkable, but it's a pain. So, while we were working on some of these ideas in the outdoor cooking space, we developed we're like, we should build a thermometer that can work with our stuff that will measure the surface temperature. Since we were going to make a thermometer that would measure the surface temperature, because that's the real cooking temperature of the food, we said, look, it would be great if we had a bunch more temperature information within the food, if we could profile the gradient, because we could see how evenly the food is cooking. And also, because we can see how the heat is propagating through the food, it becomes much easier for us to do things like make a prediction of like, well, when should we take it out of the oven? And how much carryover cooking will there be? Because if my goal is I want the chicken to nail 145 Fahrenheit, or I want it to cook more sous vide like and be even, having that information would be fantastic. And nobody makes a thermometer like that. And I have a meter and I have a meat stick, and they're pretty big. I don't, for barbecue, it's okay. But for something like a smaller piece of salmon, it's a bit of a big probe to stick in there. So being the kind of guy who would create something as small and compact as Joule, I wanted to make a smaller thermometer, and I wanted to jam 8 temperature sensors in it. And I also know a lot about internet connectivity with devices now. And Joule was good, not as good as I would have liked it to have been. And so we took some lessons of saying, look, we should make this 10 times easier. We don't want you to have to pair it. We don't want you to have to connect it. In fact, we don't even want you to have to use a phone if you don't want to. So I decided to make a kitchen timer as a display, because look, time and temperature are kind of these obvious things, and doesn't seem like having the idea that, look, if I can just take this thermometer, stick it in the food, and have it instantly showing me the temperature on my kitchen timer, frankly, that's easier than pulling my phone out all the time. On the other hand, if I want to see graphs of all my data, if I want to touch on this and see what the temperature is an inch into the food, a mobile app is fantastic at that. So a lot of this was just taking the experiences of building Joule, some of the ideas I had around how you could bring the precision of sous vide cooking to the oven, to the barbecue, heck, even to the deep fryer, because I think a thermometer is just this basic tool. It sort of spun out of that, but it was a rabbit hole. Like when I started tinkering a year ago, I was just basically trying to make my barbecue better. It was a hack job, and I pretty quickly discovered, I'm a mediocre electrical engineer on a really good day. Okay, I'm a terrible electrical engineer. I can put the right words and sometimes the right order. But, all of a sudden, a bunch of like-minded people who are passionate about cooking that sort of complement my skill sets, we were all tinkering on this stuff. And as much as building like really cool new smokers, working on new ideas for appliances was fun, we all kind of kept gravitating back to this thermometer. Like, wouldn't this be cool? And then we're like, well, we should give it a display. So it became a kitchen timer, but like, let's make it an awesome kitchen timer. And I think, I'm writing the checks for all of this. And so somewhere along the way, I was like, maybe we should just turn this into a product. And we wanted it to be a kind of a different company. We didn't want this to be corporate. I'm not a very good corporate citizen. So the Combustion Inc. was meant to be a bit like the Acme Corporation of like, we're a little bit irreverent. We're a bunch of inventors. We're somewhat misfits, but the stuff we make is going to be awesome. We're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And we want our community to come along as part of it. And so at this stage, we've announced that this is the first thing that's going to come from us. There will be more. And, we like to get feedback. So while we haven't put all of the specs up yet on the website, and we haven't announced the price because we're still there's still data that we need before we make those decisions. I like to make them at the last minute so I can have as much data as possible, something Jeff Bezos is famous for doing. What's been awesome is the feedback, like people seem genuinely excited. And then the questions we're getting, can I do this with it? Will it work like this? The answer to most of them is yes, and yes, and yes. But there's been a few where we're like, oh, that's really cool. We should totally do that. Or that would be a great thing to do. Or how could we make that work? And so this is the beginnings of a collaborative process where we will share more information over time. We will learn from our customers, and we will build products that serve them.
Well, and to me, it is, the next step, because I think, I guess back when, instant read thermometers started becoming popular and people started realizing if you control and measure your temperatures, outside or indoor cooking, that's going to, create a superior product. And the better information you have, just like controlling, the temperature down to within a half a degree with sous vide, if you can measure and monitor your internal temperature, your cooking, anything that you're cooking, and if you can measure the surface temperature, like you said, because that is actually totally different. One of the first things when people start doing smoking and barbecue, they don't, the evaporative cooling of the stall blows their mind, and that's it's a basic principle of the way
food cooks.
How food cooks, and how meat and temperature interacts, and how the proteins, how the moisture within the proteins works, and everything else. So once people started understanding that, the more we can measure and see, the better cooks we're going to become.
Well, so there's two comments here. One, time and temperature, like understanding them, measuring them, being able to manipulate them. These are like the cheat codes to better cooking. Like,
right,
like
for a video game.
Right. And so it's like, look, if I can tell you, like, what are a few things I could tell you that transform you and make you a better cook? Learning to start measuring time and temperature, learning to think about how time and temperature will give you the result you will. Like, it's one of the biggest things I can do to make you a better cook. And, sous vide was sort of like version 1.0 of that idea of, I'm going to give you this tool that will make it easy. Now we're saying, like, look, sous vide's great, but wouldn't it be awesome if you could do this in your smoker, in your oven? And the problem is it's way more complicated. Like, the inside of a smoker, what's going on is way more bizarre and complicated. In fact, we're seeing things that are blowing my mind, because now that I have 8 temperature sensors, when I stick this thing into a brisket and I have the probe sticking, an inch outside of the brisket, you might think that the temperature, if your smoker's at 225, 250 Fahrenheit, and the surface, it's evaporating and sweating. So maybe the surface is actually about 70 degrees, I'm thinking Celsius. Maybe the surface of your food is about 165 Fahrenheit. You might think that just beyond the surface, the smoke in the air is actually at 225. Not even close. In fact, we can see this really steep gradient where, it falls off. It depends on how fast is the smoke swirling, how much food is in there, but there's this gradient in the boundary layer of the smoke and air around the food. And it's very dynamic, and it changes as it cooks, and it changes as you manipulate the smoker, and it totally affects the results you get. But nobody's ever been able to see that before. And at first I thought our data was wrong. And then the more we start looking, we're like, no, the data is right. It's really more nuanced and dynamic than you would expect. And to me, that's really cool. I mean, the analogy is, if you get into a really hot bathtub, you sit still so that the hot water against your skin is cooled off by your skin, and that way you don't burn. But if you start moving around and you stir it up, you're bringing fresh hot water from further away closer to your skin, and it heats you up. That's exactly what's happening. This is convection cooking, right? But inside a smoker or inside an oven, the fan isn't perfect. The convection isn't perfect. There's places where it kind of stagnates. There's pockets of almost like smoky fog that's cooler. And all of this gets into the craft and the art of smoking. And so for me, like, being able to measure that, being able to learn how my smoker is really cooking my food, like, I feel like I've just unlocked a new level where, I'm going to be able to do all this cool stuff. And, maybe nobody else will care about this, but I am incredibly excited by the possibility. And it's because nobody's ever made a multi-point thermometer that lets you see the gradient of the food, the gradient of the temperature right around your food. And, eventually there's kind of an obvious path to making it easy for appliances to respond to the information based on the thermometer.
Exactly. Yeah. You were talking about that, how you just don't understand how things work. The first time I did a sous vide chicken, I did a half chicken and then took it out, and I didn't let it cool. I put it in my hot smoker of 375. I wanted my skin to get crispy. Well, I measured the temperature, the internal temperature. I cooked it to, 148 degrees. And I put my temperature in there, and I stuck it in the already hot smoker. expecting the temperature to automatically and the meat start rising, right away. Well, it actually just sat there, for a good 15, minutes or so, and allowed the skin to get crisp. It started rising after about, 15 or 16 minutes, but everybody that I post this up on Facebook in my group, and they're like, oh, that's all of a sudden, the temperature's going to go. We're going to cook your chicken. And no, it just sits there. I watched it. It doesn't go. But what it allows it to do is that skin to get crispy, but the inside of the chicken still sitting there at 148 degrees for, a good amount of time before it even starts to rise.
Yeah, I mean, the stages of what happens to food inside an oven or a smoker, it's actually sort of well covered in a bunch of like technical industrial processing books, that you've got these, like the rise time, the drying time. There's it isn't like your food just responds. And in fact, things that I'm starting to see that are already changing, like how I'm doing stuff in my ovens at home, the temperature is really low for a very long time. So I crank my oven way high early, because even though my oven's 450 Fahrenheit, for like the first 20 minutes, the temperature of my surface is just stuck at like ambient, and it creeps up to the doneness I want. And all of that is just time being wasted. And it's time that I could be using to dry out the skin to get it crispier. So things that I'm already finding making a change is, well, now I can measure what's happening at the surface. So I crank my oven up really high. I watch the temperature. And once the surface gets up to, I don't want to get it much hotter than that, then I'll back my oven off. But I'm cutting my cooking time by like 20%, but the skin is crisper because it's drying faster. You're moving the moisture out of it at that high temperature step. But it's not ending up overcooked, because I can see, oh, now I need to drop my oven temperature. It's fine.
Exactly.
So I think that kind of stuff is really cool. And it's a small detail, but there's no question, like the skin is better.
Yeah,
it is crisper.
That's going to turn out a better product, even though, like I said, the whole point of the things that we try to do is make the end product better. And if we could do that through technology or by making new and better things or better practices, why not? I like to learn that kind of stuff. I like to do that. There's some people will just give me a recipe and I'll follow it, and I don't want to have to know all that stuff. And that's fine. There's people always going to be people like that, but people like, me and you and a lot of people I know, tell me how it works, show me how I can do it to make it a better product. And it sounds like this is going to be something that nobody else is thinking of, and it's going to help out a lot of people once they figure out how it works.
Yeah, the very cool. I mean, the nice thing is it's dead simple to use, and that was a real goal, especially coming off to so the basic usage is as soon as you pull it out of the charge case, it's on. There's no button. It'll run for about 30 hours between charges, and it takes about 10-15 minutes to recharge fully in the charge case. But as soon as you pull it out, the kitchen timer can see it. And as soon as you stick it into the food, you just take the timer and set, use the buttons to set, this is the temperature I want the core to be when it's done, 145. Stick it in the chicken. In about 20% of the cooking time, the timer will pop up and just say, cook and tell. Because it's figured out when should you pull it out of the oven. And then it will switch over to rest 4 so that it will give you a countdown. And all we're simply saying is, look, if you wanted to get to 145, based on everything we're figuring out about your oven and how your food is cooking, we're going to give you 2 times. We'll give you a countdown and then set off a beep. It's a timer. Take it out of the oven, and then we'll say you should rest this for 7.5 minutes for the core to finish carrying over. If it's a bigger food, it'll be longer. If it's a smaller food, we've always had rules of thumbs as a chef of allow for 10 degrees Fahrenheit, allow for 15.
Right.
But they're pretty wrong. I'm pretty good at it, and I get it wrong a lot. And it's kind of been awesome to have a piece of software that can just tell me that. But if I don't care about any of that, if I've got a bunch of stuff cooking and I just want to use this as the thermometer, you can just stick it into the food and the timer will show you the temperature. Or if you want to click the button and you can surf through the core temperature, the surface, the ambient, we'll show you all that. But there isn't much of a manual needed for this. It works exactly like you'd expect. If you want it to be a thermometer, it's a thermometer. If you want it to be smart, it will be smart. That's it. And if you want to see graphs, if you want to log your data and export it, it does all that too, but pull out the app for that stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be fantastic. Something that's not out there now that can definitely help you be a better cook. So I know our time's kind of running out, but
Mhm.
I want to ask you this question because I've had other people ask me to ask you this.
Okay.
We talked about Scott Heimendinger. Now he's working for Innova, and he was
Hmm.
the one who kind of helped get the Innova Precision oven out there. A
Hmm.
home combi, oven.
Hmm.
Do you see those growing in the home market? Do you think that's something that maybe you guys will work on, or maybe Breville will work on with Chef Steps to kind of try to get more countertop space, combi steam ovens, or do you see that technology getting better?
So, this is first off, the idea of a home combi oven is awesome. And I don't have an Innova oven yet. I really, really should get Scott or Steven to try to give me a deal. I certainly wouldn't mind one. And one of the things I miss most from the Chef Steps kitchen is the day-to-day access to that rationale, or the pair of rationales. The combi ovens are fantastic. Uh, I don't know what other manufacturers. I don't know anything about Breville's intent. I don't know. I'm not involved in that anymore. What I do know is, yes, I think it will happen. I think it's like the early days of sous vide, because I think sous vide became successful enough and is successful enough that people are beginning to understand the value of having temperature control in a way that traditional appliances don't give you. And your standard. I don't care whether you have a $4,000 Miele oven or an $800 GE range. They're boxes that get hot. They can't control the humidity. They don't measure the temperatures that actually matter, which is like what's going on in your food. And so we all have these myths and lore about how to get the result you want in the oven. And for some things, it doesn't matter. But you would have had a lot of people say, well, who's going to, you did have these companies saying nobody cares about sous vide. Well, sous vide turned out to be pretty successful and is continuing to grow pretty well. I think Innova is coming in and saying, look, what people loved about sous vide was the food's awesome. And they know that their oven often disappoints them. We're going to give them an oven that isn't going to disappoint them. Now, it will take some time for them to figure out how to make it accessible enough, how to make the user experience intuitive enough. But I think as they start to deliver on that promise, as people start to discover, wow, I can get sous vide like results out of my oven, but without the packaging, without the water, that's going to be a big deal. You're going to have a lot of people that will go, oh, this is so much better, because now I can combine the searing step and the sous vide step in one appliance and there's no plastic. You're going to have people go, wow, my bread is better because there's humidity in the oven. Like, the promise of that is so big that it's just a matter of dialing in the user experience. Now, I happen to think, and I've talked with Scott about this, they're still missing the fact that they don't actually control the temperature of the food. They can bound it on the high end and on the low end, but they don't know what's happening in the center of the food. They don't really know exactly what's happening to the surface under most conditions. And so one of the things I expect you'll see them doing, you certainly see high-end appliances like Miele doing it, is like, there's still a value of sticking a thermometer in your food. I hope to be that thermometer for a lot of people. But I think the ultimate point is people do care about temperature control in the cooking. And on a modern appliance, whether it's a countertop combi oven, whether it's a wireless thermometer, whether it's a sous vide device, if you give people an intuitive and easy to use way to express what they want, their preference, and have the appliance be able to give it to them because it's actually controlling the things that matter, and people get better food from it, they're going to use that appliance all day long. So I think they'll be successful. I think other people will copy them. I am not racing to go do a countertop oven because my eyes are pretty wide open about what a product development cycle like that will cost. Probably
Right.
$5 to $8 million for productization, plus a whole lot more money for marketing. Like, that's a great thing for Innova under Electrolux to do. Not such a great thing for Combustion Inc. to be doing, but I'm certainly hopeful that we can help work with companies like Innova, work with people like Scott by combining our technologies to serve cooks, to make it easier for them to get awesome food. So I'm pretty excited by that future, because it's a future where people are still cooking, not pulling out an app, pushing a button, and Uber Eats shows up.
Right. Exactly.
And I think it's important, just like Innova did with sous vide, or like Joule did with sous vide, or Sancerre, we're in version 1.0. These products will get better. We will, they will push. We will, everyone will be will be working pretty hard to make these products. And so you kind of have to squint a little, tilt your head, and try to imagine what it's going to be like when everything's working exactly right in 3-4 years. We are early adopting, but everyone thought modernist was silly. Everyone thought sous vide were silly. All of those people were wrong. And you've got some people saying, well, why would I want humidity control? There's meetings that there's meetings at big appliance companies like GE Hire going, why do we need humidity control?
Right.
And then when customers go, because the food's better, they'll get to the program probably a little late, but it will change. It's taken longer than it should have, in my opinion, but humidity control in an oven or in a smoker or any of these things is just too powerful of a technology that has too much customer benefit to not happen.
Yeah. And you see that even in, just the outdoor cooking area. And one of the things I love to talk about with, especially when I get barbecue people on, just 10 years ago, you wouldn't have thought that pellet grills would be as popular as they are, or the different kinds of, you go into any, outdoor cooking section in the store now, it's 3 times bigger than it was just 5 or 6 years ago, with the different types of cookers, with the flat tops and the pellet grills, and now you got Masterbuilt's got the charcoal gravity fed that's hooked up to wire. I mean, these things just change, and they come out and they do things better. So I think this competition and the drive to make cooking easier and better, and keeping people home cooking instead of like you said, order an Uber Eats. it's great.
Don't get me wrong. The Uber guys do know where my house is, but there's something.
You don't want to do that every day, right?
No, but more importantly, there's something. Cooking is this fundamental human activity. It made us human, and a big part of, I think, why I still enjoy inventing in the kitchen space, the outdoor cooking space, the indoor cooking space, is you have so many people that just view this as another product. They're not thinking about how can they make it easier for people to choose to cook. That's what gets me up, is making things that basically bring us back into the kitchen, make it easier for us to choose to share a meal that's going to be awesome with our family and our friends. I don't know how to do a product that's just a marketing exercise of, well, if we make this product, it will sell to these customers. But I think that's one of the things that's really going to come out of this year is we've all been home more. We all are cooking at home more. And we're starting to see what types of things can make it easier to cook and what kind of things are terrible. So I think it's going to be this really exciting time over the next few years as companies start to come out with products that really do serve cooks at home more.
Exactly. Well, I really want to thank you for being on. As always, I like talking about this stuff, and I love your the way you think, because I think the same way. You're always looking for the next thing, and I really look forward to checking out this combustion. What's the name of the product? Is it going to be called the combustion thermometer?
Joule was the code name that I came up with for the product, and we were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't. We spent a bunch of time, even hired a naming company to try to rename it, and Joule just kind of stuck. I don't know that I can ever quite come up with a name that good again. I certainly haven't been able to come up with one that I like as much for the thermometer and timer. So it may just be Combustion Inc. wireless thermometer and kitchen timer, because it is what it is. It doesn't need to be that fancy. There's some cool technology, but it's just an awesome thermometer.
If that's what sticks, that's what sticks, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you being on. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll have you on when you are announcing the next product or when this launches. So hopefully
this will be launching soon. People will be cooking with this year.
Awesome. And I'm going to put the links to the website down below, and so people can actually find it and take a look at it. And I appreciate you being on. Thanks again. Anything else you got coming up that you want to talk about?
Nothing yet, but obviously we appreciate people signing up and spreading the word. That it's our early community that will make this a success or a failure. So if this excites you and people want to support us, the best way you can support us is by signing up and telling your friends. Well, thank you, Darren. It was a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Chris. I will see you on the next one.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks again for joining us on the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I want to thank Chris Young one more time for being on. Make sure you check out the links below for Combustion Inc. Also, check out Chef Steps. Check out Modernist Cuisine in the links below. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Make sure you follow the Fire and Water Cooking YouTube channel. Make sure you follow the Fire and Water Cooking podcast wherever you get podcasts. And make sure you check out the Fire and Water Cooking Cookbook on fireandwatercooking.com. I'll see you on the next one.